Today I'm reacting to a video by John Green where he tries to solve the mystery as to why Sierra Leone is poor.
Good morning, Hank. It's Tuesday. So later this month, we'll be making a big announcement about working with Partners in Health Sierra Leone. But before that, I thought it might be helpful to consider why Sierra Leone is so poor.
When a population has bad genes leading to bad characteristics, it almost always creates bad conditions. However, the alternative hypothesis put forward by the environmental determinists like John is difficult to falsify because what I just said fits their model too. It's just that the cause and effect have been reversed. In other words, they will always have bad starting conditions in which they can assign blame. In this video, I will talk about how I think that model can be falsified.
Now, poverty is complex, and we are not going to get to the bottom of it in a YouTube video.
I am.
But I do think this can be some helpful context. Okay, so Sierra Leone, located here, is a nation of around 7.5 million people. And while I was in Sierra Leone earlier this year, someone told me that to understand its impoverishment, I should look at a map showing all the railroad tracks that were built in Sierra Leone while it was a British colony.
Nobody ever said that to you.
As you can see, the train tracks didn't really connect cities to each other.
Excuse me, yes they did. These are the 7 biggest cities in the country, and I think most of them are linked up pretty well, actually. It doesn't reach Koidu, and I guess they could have linked this bit up, but overall, it's not bad.
They connected the mineral-rich areas of Sierra Leone to the coast of Sierra Leone so those minerals could be exported.
Well, good. That should still be useful for them today, making exporting easier. John is saying Sierra Leone is poor because the railway system, which the British built for them for free, isn't built in a way that I think it should have been. Here's an idea. Why don't they build themselves a railway to the John Green specifications if you really think that will help them?
Now, it's easy to blame these failures on a single cause, like, say, corruption.
It's genetics.
But while corruption is a serious problem in poor countries around the world, the bigger problem by far is
genetics?
That it's very hard to build health and education and infrastructure systems in communities that
have bad genetics?
Have been built around resource extraction. That's true all over the world.
If by true all over the world, you mean, not true, then yes.
And this is a very important thing to understand about colonization. It was in the business of resource extraction, and so the systems that were built in colonies were resource extraction systems.
Here's a graph showing the wealth of countries versus years colonized, and the color tells you the majority race of each country. The orange ones are those with a black majority. I'm reminded of a story that Jared Taylor often tells where he is vagabonding around Africa in his youth, and he asks people in Liberia why their country is such a mess. Then this based black man comes up to Jared and red pills him by saying that it's because they didn't have the benefits of colonialism. It's a nice story, and I know there are many on my side who also thinks that colonialism was good for Africa, and maybe that was true, but it doesn't look like there is much of a lasting effect, one way or the other, to me. Except for cases where a place was colonized so much that they left lots of white people behind. This data fits my model much better than his. Asians have high average IQs and tend to do well. Blacks have low average IQs and tend to do badly. Others are in between. If you assume that genetics is the main cause, this makes sense, and it makes sense no matter what race you look at. If your starting point is something like colonialism and resource extraction, the extent of which varies between countries, and you aren't allowed to consider genetics, you cannot explain why almost every black country is poor.
You can't explain that.
By the way, if you search for papers about the effects of colonialism on Google Scholar, most of them will say that it had a big negative impact, which means most of them disagree with me. But I think I'm the one who's right. What I did to make this graph was to independently combine 2 sources together in a way that each of the respective authors wouldn't have anticipated, which makes it harder for them to lie effectively.
There was not much colonial investment in, say, health systems or education systems, and since Sierra Leone achieved independence in 1961, it has struggled to transition away from resource extraction and to build the kinds of systems, infrastructure, healthcare, even mail delivery, that would lead to a more balanced economy and a healthier population.
If some people start off disadvantaged with bad healthcare and a poor education, as long as all populations are the same inside, they should start improving, similar to what happened to the 4 Asian tigers, and the wealth of each race should eventually meet at a common equilibrium point. However, sub-Saharan Africa has flatlined, and I don't think it's going to improve much in the future. It's just a feeling I have. I can only make sense of this if genetics is the ultimate cause. You have this genetic anchor holding them down and stopping them from developing. There's no environmental factor that only affects black countries in the way that genetics does. If a bad starting situation was the answer and there was no genetic anchor holding them down, then they should be destined to eventually start pulling themselves out of poverty from one generation to the next, like the Asians did. But they're clearly not doing that. See Kyle from the future here, and despite what I just said, I recently found new data which also gives sub-Saharan African GDP per capita over various years, and it's taking a lot of courage for me to say this, but I'm going to have to admit that I may have been wrong. This graph has forced me to reconsider things. You can see from this one that they are improving nicely from a pretty bad starting point. Now, I'm still a race realist, but I have to admit, maybe they really were held back by colonialism. Maybe they haven't reached their full potential yet. Maybe we race realists really have been unfairly maligning them and downplaying their ability to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and succeed in this modern world. Nah, just kidding. This one didn't take inflation into account. This is what those numbers look like after I included inflation. Okay, sorry. I doubt that even tricked many of you. Let's just keep going now.
But also, a community just cannot spend what it does not have. Like, if Sierra Leone spent the same percentage of its economy on healthcare and education as, say, the United Kingdom does, Sierra Leone would have about $45 per person per year to spend on healthcare and a similar amount per child per year to spend on education. That's just obviously inadequate.
In the 60s, South Korea had a similar GDP per capita as sub-Saharan Africa, so what you're saying could have been said for them too. Yet that economic bleakness didn't hold the Koreans back for long, because they are Koreans. Also, I know that Sierra Leone was and still is poorer than 1960 South Korea, but I think that they were close enough that my point still stands. It's hard to find examples of countries that have ever been doing as badly as Sierra Leone is now.
Okay, so all these challenges were compounded in Sierra Leone by a long and extremely violent civil war, which lasted from 1991 to 2002. Tens of thousands of people died, millions were displaced, the healthcare system was devastated, HIV infections increased, deaths from every cause increased.
These are the years of the Civil War, and you can see that it had a big effect, so John is partially correct. But to me, it looks like they've basically recovered from the war and have leveled off at their pre-war equilibrium point of around $700 per person.
Because the Civil War was on all sides partly funded by trade in diamonds and other valuable minerals, the war was especially devastating to Sierra Leone's diamond mining district, Kono. And as we traveled through Kono, I kept thinking about that old Faulkner line about how the past is never dead. It's not even past.
That's a stupid quote.
In the end, the government paid for a mercenary army and weaponry in part by selling the rights to the country's largest diamond concession. And so today, almost none of the wealth generated by Kono's diamond mines ends up in Kono.
Yeah, but they still make some money from it. Like, a modest amount of diamond revenue is better than nothing. Many unfortunate countries don't get any diamond revenue. Why is Sierra Leone poorer than them? John does have a point though. They're not getting what they should from those diamonds. I'm going to blame their government for this incompetency, and because Sierra Leone is a democracy, government policy is kind of downstream from population characteristics, which in turn is downstream from genetics. So ultimately, I'm going to blame genetics again.
And this has led to a paradox that is common in poor countries. While Kono is one of the richest parts of West Africa by some measures in terms of poverty rates, malnutrition, disease burden, and child and maternal mortality, it is one of the poorest and least healthy places in the world.
This is touching on what is known as the resource curse or paradox. This theory is a massive coup, which says that some countries become over-reliant on their natural resources when they are abundant, and it ends up harming them. Now, there is a correlation between being poor and being resource-rich, but two questions jump to mind. First, why are all these countries outside of Africa rich? And secondly, there are many countries in Africa which have a medium amount of resources. Why are literally all of them poor?
Because while diamond mining produces a lot of money, there aren't actually that many jobs for Sierra Leoneans in the mines. Meanwhile, all around the mine, just outside the fence, you will see many people working at breaking stone to eventually be sold as gravel. This is how you end up with a country where $100 million in diamonds gets exported annually, and 6% of all women die in childbirth. And this poverty can become a vicious cycle.
Well, obviously that's sad, but maybe all the gravel merchants in Sierra Leone should, I don't know, take a bit of initiative and try to find better jobs. I don't want to be a jerk to them, but I mean, it really sounds like their fault to me. So, what have we learnt from John's video? It seems to me that whenever people try to explain black poverty without referencing genetics, their answers are always a convoluted, disjointed, ad hoc assortment of half-truths, which interweave with reality only when it's convenient, as they attempt to tiptoe around genetics in a delicate, desperate manner, and therefore never really make sense of the situation in a way that is satisfying. If, on the other hand, you are allowed to consider genetics, everything instantly falls into place and the whole world makes sense again. Sierra Leone is not primarily poor because they were over-reliant on mining and now their economy is oversaturated with gravel merchants, or because of colonialism, or because they are cursed from having too many resources, or because their country was built on extracting those resources, or because they can't afford to spend much on healthcare or education, or because the British didn't build the railroad the way you think they should have. The obvious answer is the correct one. The reason why they, along with every other country in sub-Saharan Africa, is poor is because all of them are full of nit.